Warning, what you hear next may not be very pleasant. Harry Lipsey doesn't like this episode very much. In fact, it's probably his least favorite Seinfeld episode of all time. Hey, what's up, guys? It's Harry, back for Harry Chronicles Seinfeld. We're up to episode number 2, and this episode is The Stakeout. And to be honest, it makes me very, very missing Richard Dreyfuss and Emilio Estevez. Bad joke, sorry. But again, this episode is The Stakeout. The one thing I will say is that this is the first real Seinfeld episode. The Seinfeld Chronicles was a pilot and had a completely different feel, even a different cast at points. So it really wasn't a Seinfeld episode. This feels like a Seinfeld episode, and in some ways has some really positive things. It really starts a shell of what the show will be. The problem is it's not funny. You can be the best show in the world or have a great setup or have things that are deep into the show in the future. I mean, Art Vandelay is born in this episode. So you'd think, I'd love it because Art Vandelay is like one of my favorite characters, kind of a thing ever. But this episode wasn't funny. I literally laughed once. And the only time I laughed during this episode was, let me talk a little bit what it's about. It's about Jerry meeting a girl at a party. He didn't get her name or her not cell phone. 1989, 1990, they didn't quite have the good old cell phones back then, but he didn't get her number. So he's basically doing anything he can to try to track this girl down. So he did know where she worked, so him and George plan the stakeout. He meets the girl, her name is Vanessa, and during their small talk, Jerry says, "So, do you date immature men?" And Vanessa says, "Almost exclusively." And that got a small laugh out of me. That was the only time in this entire episode that I even smiled. It's not funny at all. There's nothing even, I don't know, it was just boring. Very boring. And there's no other Seinfeld episode that I can remember that kind of had me bored. So it was disappointing. And I remember, I didn't go into the episode thinking it was one of my favorites. I didn't expect it to dislike it as much as I did. And when I say dislike it, it's still 3 times better than any Friends episode of all time. Seinfeld is Seinfeld. And like I said, this had a shell. It really, this was Elaine Bennis's first episode. Elaine had some good lines. The one thing, I guess I will say I have to lie, I did get a little bit of a chuckle or a little bit of a smile out when they were talking about Cocoon and Cocoon 2 at the movie store at the very beginning of the episode. And that's a conversation that is total Seinfeld. So you could tell that this was like the first episode that was really going to be about nothing. What's interesting is I love this idea. I love the idea of the stakeout. I think this could have been executed so well in season 6 or 7 when Larry David was really at the height of Seinfeld. Oh man, it could have been just a beautiful episode. But, it needs jokes, and it needs to go somewhere, and it just, very predictable, but the jokes weren't there. There weren't those snappy jokes, and I was missing George, I was missing Kramer. It just didn't fill the boxes as far as a funny episode. Some interesting parts of this episode was that it's the first time we see Jerry's family. We see Jerry's mom, who I really thought did a great job, and that's Liz Sheridan. She's great as Mama Seinfeld. The father in this episode, before Barney Martin was cast, I believe that was season 2 that he is first introduced, was Philip Bruns, who was a pretty well-known TV actor. Good actor, but he just seemed really, really old to be Jerry's dad. It wasn't a great fit with Liz Sheridan. I mean, he did a nice job, he gave a good performance, but just didn't really fit. And as you could tell through the years, Seinfeld really put a lot of time into making sure that the casting decisions made sense. And that one just didn't quite make sense. So it was good. We also saw some other members of Jerry's family that we didn't see moving forward, which is probably, there wasn't much about this episode that's very memorable. I mean, I watched it 15 minutes ago and there's still nothing that really stands out to me. I like the idea. I think the stakeout thing is funny in concept, that you go to a person's work, and again, when George and Jerry were waiting for Vanessa, they came up with this Art Vandelay thing. And that's when also George's character came up with, hey, I want to be an architect. And I thought that was one of the best story arcs. I mean, one of the best kind of parts of George's character throughout the series. That his dream in life was to tell people that he was an architect. Again, the jokes really could have been funny in this episode about that, but they weren't. They just stood there. I mean, there was no art to the episode. There was no, and there's other Seinfeld episodes that maybe don't build, that maybe don't have stories that exactly click. This one had a story, it just didn't have any jokes. I can't remember a Seinfeld episode that just didn't have really, really stellar jokes, and I was missing that. Again, one last time, I really didn't make this podcast a bash on Seinfeld. It's my favorite show ever. And that 23 minutes I'm saying that I didn't enjoy, it was perfectly fine. Again, I would much rather watch it than 95% of shows or sitcoms. It just was a very disappointing episode of Seinfeld. I really hate ripping on this continuously. Man, the stand-up comedy bit before this one was really bad. Woo! Man, I mean, when the episode starts something like this, like, so I was on the line the other day, and there was two girls in front of me, and they both, the one had a check, or had a bill for $2 and one for $7. They both wrote checks. And the audience just, and I'm thinking, man, I would just kill with a stand-up comedy audience like this. So I should see if I can build a time machine, go back to 1990, and see if I can play in front of the audience that Jerry Seinfeld does for when he cuts his kind of pre-show bit, because they could laugh at anything. I mean, they would think Sinbad's funny, not oof, man, it was his bits just don't do it for me, and they did get stronger as the show went on, but there was never a strength, and man, that was obvious. Again with this episode, but hate to bash on it. Not a great episode, but it does prove to be a really positive building point. I mean, I might get a tattoo that says Art Vandelay forever, and I might get one on my left quad that says import, and then my right quad that says export. I'm a great joke. See, I would kill with Seinfeld. I'm so funny. I'm just so funny. But that's about it. Again, that is the Stakeout, and I did have a reference to the Emilio Estevez Richard Dreyfuss film, which I like both of those films, actually. Stakeout and Other Stakeout, both movies that are more enjoyable than this episode, but hate to rip on this. Again, this is Harry Chronicles Seinfeld. I promise you there are more funny moments ahead in this series, both Seinfeld and Harry Chronicles Seinfeld, so it does get better. I promise you, it gets better. Thank you so much for listening. You guys have a good one. Thanks for listening to Harry Chronicles Seinfeld.